What if Robert's Targaryen grandmother lived during Robert's rebellion? Today we're exploring exactly that. A woman with Targaryen blood and Baratheon loyalty, caught between two sides of a war she never asked for, doing the one thing nobody expected. Let's begin. The maester found Robert in the outer yard, still in his riding clothes, still dirty from Ashford. He read the note twice. Read it again. Then he handed it back without a word and went inside. She was standing beneath the stag banner when he entered the hall, not seated, not waiting in the way old women wait, hunched and patient. Standing. Rhaelle Targaryen, 71 years old, silver braided back from her face the way the women of old Valyria used to wear it, spine straight as a pike. She had dressed deliberately, Baratheon black at her shoulders, Targaryen silver at her throat. Both houses, visible at once, a declaration before a word was spoken. Robert stopped in the middle of the hall. "You're taller than I remembered," she said. "I was 14 the last time you saw me. You were already too big for your own body. You still are." She looked at him steadily. "I know what happened at Ashford. I know how many you lost. I am not going to tell you to stop." He crossed his arms. "Good. I am going to tell you what happens after you win. If you go on winning the way you've been winning." She did not wait for permission. Eris dies without a plan in place. The city burns to some degree. His heirs are killed or flee, and you spend the next 20 years watching the realm bleed while every lord decides whether Robert Baratheon is a king or a conqueror. You win the war, you may not survive the peace. Robert's jaw worked. He looked like a man who wanted to argue and had not yet found the right word. "You have a better idea. A managed abdication. Eris steps back. Viserys takes the throne. He's 7. He's done nothing to anyone. I serve as regent. The war ends in a room instead of a river." She let him sit with it. "You get what you want. The Targaryens are diminished. The realm doesn't spend a generation bleeding. And what do you get? The children live." She said it plainly. "That's all." He almost said no. She could see it move through him, the refusal already forming. Then he said, "Lyanna." Rhaelle had not spoken the name first. She had waited to see if he would. "She's alive," Rhaelle said. "Eris has her in Maegor's holdfast. If you take King's Landing the way you plan to take it, street by street, castle by castle, she will not survive the first night. The city is too large, and your men will not be careful." She held his gaze. "I can reach her. You cannot. Not yet." The hall was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the yard, a horse stamped and blew. Robert looked at his grandmother for a long time. At the silver in her hair, at the steadiness of her, at something in her face that he had not seen in anyone else in these months of marching and fighting and losing men he knew by name. Not calculation, certainty. The particular certainty of someone who has already thought through every version of this conversation and knows which one they are in. "You'd need to travel through loyalist territory," he said. "Yes. You could be killed. Yes. And you'd do this. I'm here," Rhaelle said. "I traveled through loyalist territory to tell you this. I would not have come if I weren't prepared to go the rest of the way." Robert said nothing for a moment. Then, "I want her back, grandmother. Whatever this costs, I want her back." "I know," Rhaelle said. "That's why I'm here." She did not tell him then about Lyanna's condition. There would be time for the truth, or there wouldn't. First, she had to get to King's Landing, and for that, she needed Robert's agreement. And for Robert's agreement, she needed him looking forward, not sideways. He stood in the hall of his house, his grandmother watching him, and he made the only choice a man like Robert could make when someone offered him a door instead of a wall. He said, "Go." The banner was her own design. Dragon and stag quartered on white neither house, subordinate to the other. Her maester had looked at it the way maesters look at things. They cannot categorize. She had told him to have it sewn anyway. 8 Baratheon knights rode with her. Good men, steady. Not enough to fight anything larger than a patrol, which was precisely the point. She was not riding to fight. The Roserod, south of the Reach, was churned to mud from the movement of armies that had not yet moved. Tywin Lannister's host, 12,000 men, the best equipped force in the realm, had been camped outside Ashford for 4 months. Waiting. The word they used in the dispatches was assessing. Everyone understood what it meant. The Outriders found her before she found them. 6 Lannister horsemen in crimson and gold, blocking the road with the particular stillness of men who have been told to stop everything. And mean it. Their Lord Commander was young. 20, perhaps, with a lieutenant's authority and a lord's name somewhere in his lineage. He looked at the banner. He looked at her. Something left his face. "My name is Rhaelle Targaryen," she said, before he could decide on a posture. "Widow of Ormond Baratheon, daughter of Aegon V. I am traveling to King's Landing on a matter that concerns both houses on this banner and every lord between here and the Blackwater. You will send word to Lord Tywin that I am on the road." He sent word. He also didn't move his men from across the road, which was sensible. She waited without comment. Tywin arrived within the hour. He always moved fast when it served him to move fast. He was 42, lean and controlled, the kind of man whose courtesy was a form of dominance. He looked at her banner the same way the Outrider had, but nothing left his face. His face had been trained not to let things leave it. Lady Rhaelle. He dismounted. He had decided on lady rather than princess. Precise, neither diminishing nor elevating. This is unexpected. I imagine most useful things are. A pause. He was calculating. She could almost see the columns adding. Rhaelle, operating as a negotiator. War ends early. Lannister army never commits. Wealth preserved. Ambiguity preserved. He arrived at his answer in the time it took him to take 3 steps. "I can offer you safe passage south," he said, "and an escort, if you'd accept one." "I'd accept one." She let him have the offer. "I'd ask one thing in return. Of course, your army stays where it is until you hear from me. Not from Robert. Not from Eris. From me." He studied her. "That is an unusual request. You've been sitting on this road for 4 months, Rhaelle said. A few more weeks cost you nothing. It may save you considerably." Tywin said nothing for a moment, then, "I'll hold." Neither of them specified what they thought the other was doing. That was the nature of a conversation where both parties are certain they have the advantage. She camped that night on the Rosa Road with Lannister soldiers at the perimeter and her 8 knights close. The fire was low. The night was quiet in the way nights are quiet when armies are nearby and not moving. The raven came after the second bell. She recognized the handwriting before she read the words. Eris had always written the same way. Cramped, irregular, the letters pressed hard enough to score the vellum. 4 words. Come home, dear aunt. She held it over the candle until it caught, then set the burning scrap in the dirt and watched it go to ash. He knew she was coming. That meant someone knew. At Storm's End, or on the road, or among the 8 men sleeping within earshot. She lay back and went through them one by one. Names, histories, who had family in the Crownlands, who had debts she didn't know about, who had looked at the banner with something other than simple loyalty. She did not sleep. By dawn, she had 3 candidates and no proof. The road to King's Landing was 2 more days south. Whatever Eris had prepared for her arrival, she would walk into it with a Lannister escort she didn't entirely trust, and a list of suspects she couldn't act on. She rose before the camp stirred, dressed without help, and stood looking south into the dark. She had told Robert she was prepared to go the rest of the way. That remained true. The city gates were open. That was the first wrong thing. King's Landing in wartime should have been sealed. Drawbridges up, gold cloaks doubled on the walls. The gates opened only for supply trains under escort. Instead, they stood wide, and the road through them was lined with torches burning in the afternoon light. Unnecessary torches. Torches lit for effect. Rhaelle rode through without slowing. The smell reached her before the keep did. Under the torch smoke, under the horse dung and river mud of any large city, something else, faint and sweet and chemical. She had smelled it once before. Decades ago, when an alchemist demonstrated a small quantity for her father's court. Her father had not been impressed. He'd had the man escorted out. She kept her face arranged and said nothing to the knights behind her. The court was assembled in the great hall as if for a feast. Every lord still in the city, every lady, every functionary with a title and a robe. They stood at their places with the precision of people who had been told exactly where to stand. The smiles were present. The eyes were doing something different from the smiles. Eris was at the head of the table. He had been a handsome man once. She remembered it, though it required effort now. The man at the table was 52 and looked older than that. His robes were unwashed. His nails were long, blackened at the tips. The hands of a man who had stopped attending to himself some time ago. His hair was tangled down his back, and he was smiling at her, warm, open, delighted, with the specific warmth of a man who has been looking forward to something. Rhaelle. He rose. He came around the table and took both her hands and kissed her cheek, and his grip was stronger than she'd expected. My father's sister, the last of that generation. I have missed you terribly. Eris! She let him hold her hands. You look well. The lie cost her nothing. He believed it completely. She made her case standing at the foot of his table, in front of every lord in the hall, because she had learned long ago that some conversations are safer with witnesses. Abdication in favor of Viserys. A regency council. The war ended before it reached the walls. Eris listened. He was attentive, perfectly, patiently attentive. The way a man is attentive when he has already decided on his answer and is simply waiting for the speaking to stop. When she finished, he folded his hands. It is an elegant solution, he said. Beautifully reasoned. I will consider it carefully. The court did not react. They had learned not to react. Rhaelle looked at her nephew and understood. He had not summoned her here to negotiate. She had walked in thinking she was the one with the plan, and she had been wrong. She was more useful to him here than anywhere else on the continent. Robert Baratheon's grandmother, inside the walls, under his eye. A hostage, with good manners. She had miscalculated the timing, not the goal. The timing. 2 Kingsguard fell in beside her as she was shown to her chambers, politely, without a word spoken about what they were actually doing. The chambers were fine. The corridor outside had 2 more guards. The window looked down onto an inner yard. She was nearly past the window when movement below made her stop. Queen Rhaelle was in the yard. She was not walking freely. 2 guards held her elbows loosely, with the performance of escort rather than restraint, but the grip was there. Her hair was loose, unwashed, her eyes on the ground in front of her feet. Then she looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Rhaelle's face did not change. She had learned that too. All of them had learned it. But her lips moved. 2 words. Rhaelle pressed closer to the glass, read them again, and made certain. A Kingsguard stepped between them. Rhaelle was shown the rest of the way to her chambers. The door did not lock. A courtesy. The pretense maintained. But when she tested the corridor a few minutes later, the guards were exactly where she expected them. She went back to the window. The yard was empty. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what Rhaelle had said. 2 words. No ambiguity in either of them. He's planning. The wildfire smell was still faint in the back of her throat. She thought about the open gates, the assembled court, the torches burning in daylight, the warmth of Aerys's greeting, and the strength of his grip. He had not summoned her here as a hostage. Or not only that, she did not know yet what the other purpose was. She had perhaps a day to find out before whatever he was planning moved into a phase she couldn't navigate from a locked room. She began the way she always began, with what she had. A comfortable room, a window facing the inner yard, 2 guards in the corridor who rotated at the 4th bell and the 8th, a Lannister escort camped in the outer yard who were technically her men and practically Tywins. A court full of frightened people, at least some of whom were frightened enough to be useful. She sent a request to the Grand Maester for a digestive tonic, a small complaint, the kind elderly travelers make. He came himself, which told her he'd been waiting for an excuse. Pycelle arrived with his bag and his manner, solicitous, faintly condescending, the practiced warmth of a man who has spent 40 years making powerful people feel he is their servant while being no one's servant but his own. He sat at her bedside and took her pulse and asked about her journey with the particular attention of someone listening for something specific. She gave him the frightened old woman. Not broadly. Pycelle was too experienced for a broad performance. But precisely, a slight tremor when she mentioned Aerys's greeting, a careful pause before she said she was sure everything would resolve, the way a person pauses when they are not sure at all. He softened. They always softened when they thought they were the most composed person in the room. In 20 minutes of careful conversation, she learned 3 things. Jaime Lannister was unhappy in the Kingsguard, visibly, increasingly, in ways that made the other knights uncomfortable. Jon Connington was losing ground in the field because Aerys countermanded his orders by Raven before they could be executed, and Lyanna Stark was alive, held in the upper floors of Maegor's Holdfast, attended by a single maester named Colin, who came and went at the 2nd and 6th bells. Pycelle did not know he had told her any of this. He believed he was assessing her state of mind for the king. He left satisfied. Rhaelle noted the maester's schedule and went back to the window. Sir Arthur Dayne came after the midnight bell, not through the door, The guards were still in the corridor, through the servants' passage behind the wardrobe, the one she had noticed but not used, the one she had been wondering whether anyone else had noticed. He was in plain clothes, no sword, his hands visible. He stood in the center of the room and looked at her with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is living in the first moments of its consequences. "I have perhaps 10 minutes, he said. "Then don't explain yourself. Tell me," he told her. Lyanna Stark was with child, near her term, weeks, not months. Rhaegar had believed he was fulfilling a prophecy. Dane did not say which one, and she did not ask. Rhaegar was dead at the Trident. The prophecy, whatever it had been, had died with him at the ford. The child, if it lived, would carry Targaryen blood and Stark blood, and the specific political weight of having been the reason the rebellion started. There was no version of that child's existence that was simple. Dane said, "I don't know what you can do with this. Neither do I yet. I told you because—" He stopped. "Because I'm the only person in this building who might," she said. "You don't have to explain it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he went back through the passage. She sat in the dark after the panel closed and did not reach for the candle. If Robert learned Lyanna was carrying a Targaryen child, there was no negotiated peace. There was only what Robert did to things he couldn't control, which was destroy them. The child could not be that. The child had to become something else, something no one could kill with a sword, something that existed in a category that made killing it politically impossible. She had weeks before Lyanna delivered, less time than that before Aerys moved to whatever next phase Rhaelle had warned her about. She needed to get a message out. No raven, she had no access to the rookery and wouldn't trust it if she did. No courier, the guards changed at the 4th and 8th bells, and there was no gap she could see. No one among the 8 Baratheon knights she was certain of. And even if she were certain, they were in the outer yard, under Lannister eyes. She had Dane, who had already taken an enormous risk, and would be watched more closely if he came again. Then she thought about Pycelle, and the Maester Colin, and the schedule of the 2nd and 6th bells. She thought about it for a long time. She asked Pycelle for needlework supplies on the 2nd morning. Thread, a hoop, plain linen. She named the items with the slightly embarrassed practicality of a woman who needed something to do with her hands. She mentioned her mother had taught her the High Valyrian devotional patterns. She said idle hours were difficult at her age. Pycelle was charmed. Of course he was. He sent a servant with a full sewing kit before the next bell. She worked at the window where the light was best, where the guards could see her if they looked, which was precisely the point. A prayer cloth in the traditional style, a central panel of interlocking knots, a border of colored thread in the devotional sequence. She had not done this particular work in 30 years, but the hands remembered. The border was the message. Stefan had been 9 years old when she taught him the cipher. A boy's game, they called it, a way to pass notes in the household without the maesters reading them. He had loved it. She had never told him she had invented it during her first year of marriage, when she understood that living at Storm's End meant living among people who reported to the king. And she had needed a way to think on paper without those thoughts being read. The color sequence encoded 17 words, precise, stripped of anything unnecessary. She worked slowly and did not rush and did not check the guards to see if they were watching. On the evening of the 2nd day, Sir Arthur Dane came to her door openly, permitted now, as he was Kingsguard and she was technically a guest. She showed him the finished cloth with the mild pleasure of an old woman proud of her work. She also gave him a name, Septon Aldrich, Baratheon household, currently lodging in the city near the Street of Steel. Dane looked at the cloth for a moment. He said it was very fine. He left with it, folded in his hand. Neither of them acknowledged what it was. The message told Robert not to assault the city. It told him to make an offer of terms. Specific, public, generous enough that every wavering lord would see them, and structured so Aerys could not accept without appearing to kneel, and could not refuse without losing the lords he still had. It told him Lyanna was alive, which floor, which bells, which maester, and it told him to send Eddard Stark to the gates as the bearer. Not Robert, Ned. Ned, because he was the one Robert trusted to carry something fragile without breaking it. Ned, because he was the one she thought she could work with when the time came. And she believed the time was coming sooner than Robert knew. She wrote it in 17 words. She had learned over 70 years that the important things rarely needed more. The cloth left on the morning of the third day in a Septon's boy's satchel. She watched from the window as the boy crossed the outer yard with the casual, unhurried pace of someone running a routine errand. She watched until he was through the gate. For the first time since the Rosa Road, something in her chest eased. Then the shouting started. It was coming from the direction of the city gates, not the sound of a fight, but the sound of something large and organized, arriving fast. She pressed close to the glass. Tywin Lannister's banners, crimson and gold, moving through the city gates in column. Not a parley flag, not an escort formation. Drawn steel, closed ranks, 12,000 men moving at pace. She had told him to hold. She had extracted his agreement personally, on the road, and he had given it to her, with the unhurried confidence of a man who expected to keep his word right up until the moment keeping it became inconvenient. She stood at the window and watched the Lannister army pour into King's Landing, and tried to determine, from the direction of movement and the formation of the advance columns, whether Tywin was coming to defend the city or to take it. The formations told her nothing definitive. Tywin was too careful for his formations to be definitive. It was the most important question in the Seven Kingdoms at this moment, and she did not know the answer. Below her, somewhere in the yard, men were shouting. Somewhere in the city, beyond the walls, people were beginning to understand what was happening to them. The prayer cloth was in a satchel, moving toward the Street of Steel. Robert was a day's ride north. Ned Stark was wherever Ned Stark was. She had, perhaps, 12 hours. The sounds reached her before she could see anything. Not screaming, not yet, but the low, compressed noise of a large force moving through streets that weren't built for it. Boots on cobblestone, horses shying, the particular human sound of a city holding its breath. The Kingsguard in her corridor left at a run sometime after the third bell. She gave him 4 minutes, then she moved. She knew the Red Keep the way she knew the cipher, not from recent use, but from the kind of early memorization that never fully leaves. Her father had brought her here as a girl, again as a young woman. She had walked these passages in better times, when the torches were changed on schedule and the servants smiled without calculation. The passage that ran behind the guest wing connected to the kitchens. The kitchen passage connected, through a low door she had to duck through, to the corridor above the dungeons. The alchemist's guildmaster was where Pycelle had told her he slept, without knowing he'd told her. in the small chamber off the lower passage, close to his work. He was awake when she found him. He was awake and packing. She blocked the doorway. "The caches," she said. "Where are the order bearers?" He was a small man with the careful face of someone accustomed to being underestimated. He looked at her and appeared to make a rapid calculation about which threat was more immediate. "The king's orders. The king is dead or will be within the hour. His orders die with him." She kept her voice level, the way she had learned to keep it when things required levelness. "You will find your order bearers and you will stand them down. The caches will not be ignited tonight. This city has 300,000 people in it." He packed nothing else. He left. She did not know with certainty that he would comply. She had said it as though certainty were already established, which was sometimes the same thing. She reached the throne room before the Lannister lords. Jaime Lannister was standing over the body with a sword he hadn't cleaned, in the center of a room that was entirely still. He was 20 years old. He looked at her when she entered and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. "I've done something I can't undo," he said. After a moment, she looked at Aerys on the floor. The throne room was cold and large and full of the particular silence of a place where something irreversible has just occurred. "You stopped the wildfire," she said. He stared at her. "I know you stopped it. I stopped it too, in the passage below." She crossed the room and took his arm, not gently, but steadily, the way you take the arm of someone who needs to be moved before they take root. She sat him on the steps of the Iron Throne. "We both stopped it. That is what happened in this room tonight." He looked at Aerys. He looked at his sword. She kept her hand on his arm. "Sit," she said. "Someone will arrive shortly. When they do, you will still be sitting here. That matters more than you think it does." He sat. He was too exhausted and too young to argue, which was what she had counted on. Ned Stark appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. He came in slowly, reading the room in the way a careful man reads a room: the body, the young Kingsguard, the old woman on the steps. He walked forward across the stone floor and stopped on the other side of Aerys, and he and Rhaelle looked at each other across the dead king. He had her cipher. She could see it in what he was not saying. "I came as fast as I could," he said. "Then we have perhaps 2 hours before Robert arrives." She stood. She looked at Jaime, who was watching Ned with the expression of a man waiting to be executed, and said quietly, "Stay here until a Lannister lord comes. Tell them you stopped the wildfire. Use those words exactly." She held his gaze until she was certain he had heard her. "You saved this city. Remember that before you remember anything else." Then she turned back to Ned. She knelt beside Aerys. He had been a handsome man once, before the throne had finished with him. She closed his eyes with her own hands, because she was the only Targaryen in the room, and someone had to stand at the edge of what the dynasty had been before it became whatever came next. She stood. She looked at Ned. "Come with me," she said. They crossed the yard on a walk. Running would draw attention, and attention was the one thing they could not afford in the next 2 hours. The sounds of the city had changed. Lower now, more dispersed. The Lannister army settling into occupation rather than advance. Someone had made a decision to hold rather than burn. She did not yet know whether to be grateful to Tywin for that or afraid of what it had cost him. Ned walked beside her without being asked to keep pace. He was taller than she'd expected from the dispatches. "Quieter? You read it fully," she said. "Not a question." 3 times. He glanced at her. You taught the cipher to your son. When he was 9, he never used it for anything important. She kept walking. Tell me about the Outriders. I sent 2 men to the Eastern Gate an hour ago. Robert's vanguard will be redirected. It buys us time. Not much. He paused. He'll know something is wrong when they come back with different orders. Let him know something is wrong. That's manageable. Let him arrive before we're finished. That isn't. Ned accepted this without comment. That quality in him, the willingness to receive information and adjust without protest, was what she had gambled on when she wrote his name into the cipher. She had been right. It was useful to be right about people, and rarer than it should have been. Dane told me about the prophecy, she said, about what Rhaegar believed. Yes, the child's existence is a political problem of the First Order. You understand that. I understand it. The child cannot be Robert's enemy. Robert destroys his enemies. She kept her voice even. The child has to become something Robert cannot touch, something that exists outside the categories he uses. That requires a story, and the story requires time to settle before he sees the child for the first time. Ned was quiet for several steps. What story? That depends on what we find in that room. Sir Arthur Dane was at the door of Maegor's Holdfast alone. The other Kingsguard was gone, fled with the collapse, or reassigned, or simply making a private calculation about where loyalty ended. Dane stood with his hands at his sides, no sword drawn, watching them come across the yard. Ned stopped 6 feet away. They looked at each other. The weight of it was not small. A Kingsguard still sworn to a dead king's orders, the brother of the rebel lord whose rebellion had just succeeded. Everything that was supposed to happen in this moment was written into the logic of the past year. Ned should demand entry. Arthur should refuse. One of them should reach for a weapon. Rhaelle walked past both of them and put her hand on the door. She asked me to come, Rhaelle said, without turning. You know that. Sir Arthur. A pause. Then the sound of Dane stepping aside. She went in. After a moment, Ned followed. After another moment, so did Dane, closing the door behind him, which meant he had chosen a side without naming it, which was probably the only honest thing available to him. The stairs were narrow, and the upper corridor was dim. The maester, young, perhaps 20, with the unmistakable face of someone who had been frightened for several days without rest, nearly collided with them coming out of the room. He looked at Ned. He looked at Rhaelle. He appeared to decide that whatever was happening was above his authority to manage, stepped to the wall, and let them pass. Rhaelle went in first. The room was small and close and smelled of effort. 2 candles on the table by the bed. The window shuddered against the noise of the city. Lyanna Stark was propped against the headboard with the deliberate arrangement of someone who had decided how she wanted to be seen, which told Rhaelle more about her in 3 seconds than anything in the dispatches had. She was pale. She was exhausted. She was entirely herself. She looked at Rhaelle and said, "You're Robert's grandmother." "Yes, he sent you. Not a question. An assessment. He didn't send me. I came, and then I sent for your brother." Rhaelle crossed the room and pulled the chair close to the bed and sat in it, because standing over a woman in this condition was a particular kind of rudeness she had no interest in. "I know what you're carrying. I know what it means. I am not here to take anything from you." Lyanna looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked past her at Ned, who had come to stand in the doorway, close enough to be present, far enough to give the room to the women in it. "Ned," she said, "Lya." His voice was controlled. What it cost him to keep it controlled was not visible in his face, but it was in his hands, which he had pressed flat against the doorframe. She looked back at Rhaelle. "He can't know about the child," she said. "Not yet. Not like this. Not arriving from a battle. Not in the first hour." She held Rhaelle's eyes. "Promise me you'll be here when I tell him. Promise me you'll stay in the room." Rhaelle understood what she was asking. Not concealment, not protection. Exactly. She was asking for management of the moment, for someone to be present who could absorb the blast and redirect it before it killed something that didn't need to die. It was precisely the kind of thinking Rhaelle would have done. "I promise," she said. Outside, somewhere beyond the shuttered window, King's Landing was learning what it was going to be next. They had perhaps 90 minutes. The city had gone quiet in the way cities go quiet after violence. Not peaceful, but exhausted. The noise pulled inward. Through the shuttered window, the occasional shout, the occasional horse. Nothing sustained. Rhaelle had not been a midwife in 30 years. She did it anyway. The maester hovered and was useful when directed and managed not to make things worse, which was the most she asked of him. Ned stayed at the window, his back to the room, and did not turn except when she needed another candle. Arthur Dane sat in the corridor outside and did not move. None of them spoke, except as necessary. The boy came just before dawn. He arrived, loud and healthy and furious about it. Dark-haired, his face the outraged red of someone who has been informed the world exists and objects to the terms. Rhaelle cleaned him and wrapped him and put him in Lyanna's arms. Lyanna wept, not from pain, or not only that. The quality of it was different. It was the weeping of someone who has been waiting to find out whether something was worth it, who holds in their arms the only evidence available, who does not yet know the answer, and loves it regardless. Rhaelle sat back and let her have the moment. After a time, Lyanna looked up. "Aemon," she said. Rhaelle waited. "That's his name. Rhaegar chose it. We agreed on it, before everything became impossible." She looked at the boy, not at Rhaelle. "I need you to swear 2 things. Tell me that he'll be protected, whatever that requires, whatever it costs. Protected." She looked up then. "And that, whatever he becomes, he knows I chose. Not a girl who was taken. A woman who chose and who knew what choosing meant and who lived with it." She held Rhaelle's eyes. "Promise me he knows that." Rhaelle thought of her father dead at Summerhall in the ruin of another man's impossible belief. She thought of her husband, dead before she was ready to lose him. She thought of Stefan and the cipher she taught him when he was 9. "I swear it," she said, "on my father's grave." She meant every word. Lyanna slept with the boy in her arms. Finally, after the maester had finished and the candles had burned low. The room was gray with early light. Ned turned from the window. He spoke quietly, not to spare Rhaelle, but to spare his sister the weight of the conversation she'd already had tonight and did not need to have again. "John," he said. "I want to name him John." Rhaelle looked at him. A common name, an unremarkable one, a false father, mine if I can make it hold. and a life so ordinary no one ever looks at him twice. His voice was steady. He grows up at Winterfell. He's snow. He's nobody. That is Ned's solution, Rhaelle said. Not Lyanna's. Lyanna's solution gets him killed. He said it without heat, without apology. She can name him Aemon in her heart. But if Robert ever hears that name on this child's lips, if anyone connects this boy to Rhaegar, ever, in a way that can be traced and proven, there is no version of that where the child survives. He looked at his sister sleeping. You know I'm right. She did know. That was the difficulty. She made me promise to be here when she told him, Rhaelle said. She made me promise the boy would know what his mother chose. He can know it when he's old enough to know not to kill him. They looked at each other across the bed, across the sleeping girl and the sleeping child. Two people who were both right about different things, which was usually worse than one person being simply wrong. Neither of them spoke. Then hoofbeats in the yard below. Not one horse. Many. Moving fast, then stopping. Lyanna's eyes opened. She had not been asleep, or she had been, and the sound had reached through it, because she knew that sound. She had been waiting for it, perhaps, in the particular way people wait for things they are afraid of, and more afraid of not having. She looked at Rhaelle. Bring him to me, she said. Now, before anyone else gets there. The boy was already in her arms. She pulled him closer. Her face had changed, the exhaustion still present, the grief still present, but underneath those things, something else, something set. She was going to tell him herself. Rhaelle stood. Rhaelle was in the yard when Robert rode through the gates. She had come down alone, no escort, no Ned, no one to stand beside her and absorb part of what was coming. This was not an oversight. Robert, arriving to find a crowd, would give him something to perform for. Robert arriving to find his grandmother, alone in a quiet yard, gave him nowhere to put the performance. He looked terrible. 2 years of campaign in his face, the dust of hard riding still on him, his hammer at his belt, and his eyes moving fast across the yard, searching. He pulled up when he saw her. She spoke before he could. Aerys is dead. Jaime Lannister killed him, and he stopped the wildfire before he did it. And that is what you will say when people ask. She held his gaze. The city did not burn. I stopped that. And Lyanna is alive in Maegor's holdfast asking for you. Now. His face ran through several things in rapid succession. Fury looking for a target. Disbelief. And then something that was not quite relief, because relief implied he had believed there was something to hope for, and she did not think he had let himself believe that for some time. He dismounted. He handed the reins to no one in particular. He walked. She walked with him. She had promised to be in the room. She kept the promise. Robert went to the bed and sat on the edge of it and looked at his sister, at Lyanna, pale and tired and entirely herself. And for a moment, he couldn't speak at all, which was the most honest thing Rhaelle had ever seen him do, Lyanna told him. She did not soften it, and she did not rush it. She told him about Rhaegar, not the monster Robert needed him to be, but the man who believed an impossible thing and acted on it. She told him about the tower and her choice and what she had understood about that choice while she was living with it. She told him about the boy. She held the child out. Robert looked at him for a long time. Whatever moved through his face in those seconds, Rhaelle did not try to name. She had learned, at 71, that some things in people's faces are not for other people to name. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, he asked, "Is he healthy?" Lyanna said. Robert nodded. He reached out and touched the boy's hand. One finger, the way large men touch fragile things, the boy gripped it without knowing what he was gripping. "All right," Robert said. To no one, to the room. Rhaelle stayed near the door and did not speak. The maester came back at midday. He was quiet when he entered, and his face when he checked Lyanna was the face of a man preparing to say something he did not want to say. He said it to Rhaelle in the corridor in a low voice. She went back into the room. Robert was still there, sitting in the chair now, the boy asleep in the cot by the window. Lyanna was awake, or had been. Her eyes opened when Rhaelle came in. "I know," Lyanna said. Before Rhaelle could speak, "I've known for a little while." She looked at Robert. "Hey," she said. He looked up. "Don't." She held his gaze. "Don't do the thing where you make it mean something it doesn't. I made choices. They cost what they cost." She glanced toward the cot. "He's the part that matters." Robert said nothing. His face had gone very still, not closed, but the opposite of closed, like something had been taken off it. She died before the sun set, with Robert holding one hand and Ned the other, and the boy asleep in the cot by the window, undisturbed. Robert did not move for a long time after. He sat in the chair with Lyanna's hand in both of his, and he did not move and he did not speak, and nobody asked him to. When he finally stood, he looked at Rhaelle, not with rage, not with grief exactly. Grief was too simple a word for what was in his face. Something quieter and more permanent, like a man who has understood something about the world that he will spend the rest of his life carrying. "What do we do now?" he said. He had never asked anyone that, not once in 2 years of war, not at Ashford, not at the Trident. The question cost him something to ask. She could see it cost him. She looked at him for a moment. "Come with me," she said. "There's work." Through the night while Robert sat with Lyanna's body, Rhaelle worked. She had asked Ned for parchment, ink, and a candle, and he had brought them without asking why, which confirmed what she already believed about him. She wrote until the third bell, crossed out 2 sections, rewrote them, and by dawn had something she could stand behind. The settlement was not long. Length in documents of this kind was a form of uncertainty. Every additional clause an invitation for argument. She had written it short and plain. Robert Baratheon confirmed as king by right of conquest and blood. The rebellion retroactively legitimized as a response to Aerys's demonstrated incapacity. The surviving members of House Targaryen to live in exile under terms that prevented the raising of armies, the making of alliances against the crown, and the assembly of any force that could constitute a military threat. The terms were not generous. They were survivable, which was the most she could make them. At first light, she brought it to Ned Stark, who read it twice and signed without amendment. She brought it to Jon Arryn, who had arrived with Robert's vanguard, and who read it once and signed it with the unhurried gravity of a man who had spent years waiting for something to ratify. Then she walked to the Lannister officers' quarters. Tywin had been awake all night. He looked at the document for approximately 40 seconds. He signed it. The signature cost him nothing. It bought him everything. His name on the founding document of a new reign. His loyalty established before any other great lords. She had known he would sign before she walked in. She had also known that knowing this in advance and letting him believe he was making an independent calculation were not the same thing, and that the difference mattered. The Loyalists arrived mid-morning under a parley flag. 7 lords, John Connington at their head, riding into a city that was no longer the city they had ridden out of when the rebellion began. They were not coming to submit to Robert. Rhaelle had understood this from the composition of the delegation before she saw their faces. They were coming to submit to her, to offer their surrender to the last Targaryen voice withstanding, to preserve the form of the dynasty even as its substance collapsed around them. She met Connington privately in a small room off the Great Hall before he could address the assembly. He was 33 and looked older. He had been a good commander in a war where good command was repeatedly undone by the man who held the throne, and the defeat had settled into him the way defeats settle into men who know they should have won. He sat across from her and held himself carefully, the way people hold themselves when they are afraid of what might come out if they stop holding. She did not open with terms. "You loved him," she said, not a question. Connington said nothing for a moment. Then, yes, that was real. Nothing that happened after makes it not real. She waited. "I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking what you would want, if wanting were permitted." He looked at the table. "I want to go home to Griffin's Roost. That can be arranged." He looked up. "Sign the document." She said, "Go home. Raise your children if you have them. Tend your land. The war is finished, and you fought it with honor, and there is no shame in surviving it." She held his gaze. Rhaegar would not have wanted the alternative. She did not know if that was true. She said it because it was the thing that would reach him, and because she believed it was probably true, which was close enough. He signed. 5 of the remaining 6 lords followed before the afternoon bell. Each required something slightly different. One needed the terms read aloud. One needed a private assurance about his family's seat. One needed simply to be looked at steadily until the resistance ran out of reasons to sustain itself. She gave each man what he needed. She kept track of what she had promised. The 7th lord was Edwell Celtigar of Claw Isle. He refused in the full assembly, loudly, with the particular fury of a man who has been waiting for someone to be louder than him and has decided to be that person himself. He called Rhaelle a traitor to her blood. He named Viserys the true king, a 7-year-old boy currently on Dragonstone, in front of every lord in the room, in front of Robert's bannermen, in front of Ned Stark and Jon Arryn and Tywin Lannister's officers standing near the back wall. Robert had been in the doorway for the last 20 minutes. Rhaelle had known he was there. She had not acknowledged it and had not asked him to leave because his presence as a witness was more useful than his absence. He came forward now through the room and stopped beside her. He did not look at Celtigar. He looked at Rhaelle. "What would you like done with him?" he said, quietly. The room heard it anyway. The room had gone entirely still. Rhaelle looked at Celtigar, who had stopped shouting and was now standing in his own silence, with the expression of a man who has said the thing and is waiting to find out what the thing costs. "Nothing," she said. "Let him go home. Let him tell his children what he saw here today." She kept her voice even. A man who refuses loudly in an assembly and walks out alive is evidence that this settlement is real. An example is only useful if it survives to be an example. Celtigar looked at her. Something moved in his face that was not gratitude and not submission, but was perhaps the beginning of uncertainty, which was enough. Robert nodded. Celtigar left. The room absorbed what it had witnessed. Robert Baratheon, who had spent 2 years breaking things, deferring to his grandmother in public, in front of every lord who would carry the memory of this day back to their own halls and their own councils. Every person in that room understood what it meant. Some of them looked relieved. Some of them looked afraid. Rhaelle understood both reactions. She shared them. 3 weeks after the fall of King's Landing, a raven arrived addressed to Rhaelle in a hand she did not immediately recognize. It took her a moment. She had only seen Rhaella's handwriting twice, both times on formal documents during Aerys's court, ceremonial things that required the queen's signature beside the king's. One sentence: "I have a daughter, and I intend to live." Rhaelle read it 3 times. Then she set it on the table and looked out the window at the city. She and Rhaelle had never been close. Court protocol kept a careful distance between any woman of standing and the king's wife. Too much proximity to Rhaelle meant proximity to Aerys's suspicion, and Aerys's suspicion was a thing everyone in that court had learned to navigate around. What Rhaelle knew of Rhaelle, she had observed from that careful distance. A woman of intelligence and patience and the particular endurance of someone who had been surviving something terrible for a very long time, without permitting it to make her small. The sentence was not a plea. It was not a question. It carried no request for help and no expression of fear. It was a declaration. I exist. I am watching. I have decided something. From a woman who had crossed from King's Landing to Dragonstone during the worst of the Sax chaos with an infant in her arms, in a storm, and arrived, both children alive, Rhaelle alive. She had survived all of it and had written one sentence, and the sentence said everything it needed to say. The problem the sentence created was not small. Daenerys was an infant. She had done nothing and was capable of nothing. She was also a Targaryen daughter, which made her a succession point, a rallying flag, a reason for every remaining loyalist to believe the dynasty's extinction was not yet complete. Celtigar's refusal in the assembly 3 weeks ago had been the loud version of something quieter that existed in dozens of halls across the realm. Give those lords a living Targaryen princess, and they had something to organize around. Robert knew this. He had said as much in the raw hours after Lyanna died, said it plainly, without the softening that grief usually applied to things a man said when he wasn't guarding himself. He had said it, and then not acted on it, and had looked at Rhaelle in a way that suggested he was aware he hadn't acted, and was not entirely sure why. She did not intend to wait for him to become sure. She went to him that afternoon. He was in the small council chamber, not yet holding formal court. The court was being assembled, the appointments argued over, the machinery of a new reign being fitted together around a man who had spent 2 years winning a war and had arrived at its end to find that winning created more problems than it solved. He looked up when she came in. He did not look surprised. She told him what she wanted. One ship and his word. "Let me sail to Dragonstone," she said. "Let me bring back Rhaelle's surrender and the children alive, and arrange for the girl, Daenerys, to be fostered somewhere quiet, somewhere she can live an ordinary life and never be a queen and give no one a reason to look at her twice." He leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "You're asking me to let a Targaryen girl live," he said. "Not an accusation. A statement of fact, the way Robert made statements when he was deciding how to feel about them." "I'm asking you to decide what kind of king you are," Rhaelle said, "before the story of the first thing you decided gets told at every fireside in Westeros." She kept her voice even. "You can be the king who killed an infant. That story will follow you into every hall you ever sit in. Or you can be the king who was merciful to a child who had done nothing, and no one will ever fault you for it, because she is an infant, and she is a girl, and she is no threat to anyone who doesn't need her to be." Robert was quiet for a long time. "One ship," he said finally. "One ship." He looked at her. "Don't make me regret it." "I never have," she said, which was not quite true, but was true enough for the moment. Dragonstone emerged from the morning fog the way it always had, black and volcanic. The towers carved into shapes that were not quite natural and not quite architecture, the whole of it sitting on its rock above the sea, like something that had grown there rather than been built. Rhaelle had not seen it in 30 years. It looked exactly the same. It always would. Her silver flag was up. The harbor gates were open when they arrived. A woman stood on the battlements above the gate, alone, watching the ship come in. She did not move as they docked. She did not send anyone down. She simply watched and waited. And when Rhaelle came up the steps from the harbor, she was there at the top of them. Rhaelle Targaryen at 33 looked like a woman who had been through a great deal and had decided that the great deal would not be the most notable thing about her. She was thinner than Rhaelle remembered. Her eyes were clear. "You came," Rhaelle said. "You wrote," Rhaelle said. The receiving room was plain. Dragonstone had never been a comfortable castle, only an imposing one. Viserys sat in a chair by the wall, 7 years old, clean and composed, with the careful composure of a child who has been told to sit still and has been sitting still for some time. He watched Rhaelle with his father's eyes and said nothing. Daenerys was in Rhaelle's arms, pale, silver-haired, entirely calm in the way infants are calm when they have been held consistently enough to trust it. The garrison was visible through the windows, armed, still, watching. Rhaelle did not wait for Rhaelle to begin. "I will surrender Dragonstone," she said. "The garrison will stand down. Viserys will accept whatever terms you bring from Robert, because he is 7, and I will explain it to him, and he will understand what I explain." She looked at Rhaelle steadily. "But my children leave with you, not with Robert's fleet, not with a Lannister escort. With you, on your word alone. You have my word. I know I do. That's why I opened the harbor." Rhaelle looked at Viserys, who was still watching from his chair with that careful stillness. She looked at the infant in Rhaelle's arms. "There's a place," she said, "quiet, far enough from King's Landing that no one looks twice at it. The girl can grow up without a title and without a target." She held Rhaelle's gaze. "Viserys will go to Essos. There are arrangements that can be made. A household. People loyal enough and distant enough that he's safe and removed from anything he could use as a base. He'll be comfortable. He won't be a king." Rhaelle said nothing for a moment. Then, "He'll hate that. Probably. For a while. And after a while, that depends on him." Rhaelle looked at her son. Something moved in her face. Not grief exactly, more the specific weight of a decision made before it was asked for. She had made this decision before Rhaelle arrived. That was clear. She had made it on the crossing from King's Landing, in the storm, with the baby in her arms, and she had simply been waiting for someone to arrive and ratify it. "Then let us see the documents," she said. They worked through the afternoon. The garrison captain witnessed the surrender. The terms were read aloud in the courtyard, so there was no ambiguity later about what had been agreed. Rhaelle drafted the language for Viserys' exile arrangement in plain words that left nothing open to interpretation. It was nearly the evening bell when the garrison captain appeared at the door. He had a letter, King's Landing seal, Jon Arryn's personal mark, the wax still carrying the urgency indent that Arryn's maester used for time-sensitive correspondence. He held it out to Rhaelle with the expression of a man who has been deciding whether to deliver something and has resolved the question only just now. She broke the seal. One piece of information. Someone had told Robert Baratheon the story of the night Lyanna died, the child, the name Aemon, the presence of a Targaryen woman at the birth. The message did not name the source. It said only, "He received this 2 days ago. He has not acted, but he has stopped sleeping." Rhaelle set the letter on the table. The room was very quiet. Rhaelle was watching her, had been watching her face as she read, which meant she already knew the letter contained something significant. "What is it?" Rhaelle said. Rhaelle looked at her. She thought about what to say and decided on the truth, because there was no version of the next 12 hours that worked on anything other than truth between them. She told her. Rhaelle was still for a moment. Then she set Daenerys in the cradle by the wall and looked at Rhaelle with an expression that was not surprise. "We need to sail tonight," Rhaelle said. "Yes," Rhaelle said, "we do." The wind was wrong from the first hour. It came from the southwest, directly against them, and the captain explained the situation with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that the person he was explaining it to did not want to hear it. They could tack. It would add a day, possibly 2, depending on whether the wind shifted overnight. It did not shift overnight. Rhaelle stood at the prow in the early mornings and calculated. 3 days had been the plan. 4 was now the reality. Each additional day was a day Robert had been alone with what he knew. Alone in the specific way powerful men are alone. Surrounded by people, none of whom would tell him what he was actually thinking, or ask what he intended to do about it. Jon Arryn might, but Arryn had also written the warning letter, which meant Arryn was managing the situation rather than resolving it, which meant even Arryn did not know what Robert would decide. She knew Robert. She had known him since he was a boy riding too large for his horse around the yards of Storm's End. She knew what happened when Robert was processing something privately in the deep place where he made the decisions that mattered. He went still and he went quiet. And when he came back out of that stillness, whatever he had decided was already fixed. You could not argue him back from it. You could only have been there before he went in. 4 days. She was not there. Rhaelle found her on the 4th night, after the children were settled. She came to Rhaelle's cabin without knocking. They were past that now, past the formality that had kept distance between them through 2 decades of court life. She sat in the chair by the small table and looked at her hands for a moment before she spoke. "I knew what Rhaegar believed," she said. Rhaelle waited. The prophecy, the prince that was promised. She did not look up. "He told me when Viserys was born. that Viserys wasn't the one, that the child would have to be born of fire and ice, that he understood now what the dream meant. She was quiet for a moment. I had dreamed of dragons myself when I was carrying them. Both times. I know about the dreams, Rhaelle said. My father's people believed in them. I chose not to stop him. She said it plainly. No softening. I could have. I could have told Eris. Not about the prophecy, but that Rhaegar was planning to take another woman. Eris would have acted. The rebellion might not have happened. She looked up. I didn't, because I thought the prophecy might be real. The ship moved under them. Outside the porthole, the sea was black, and the stars were out, indifferent. Rhaelle sat with it for a long time before she spoke. The belief was real, she said finally. The damage was also real. Both things are true at the same time, and there is no way to separate them, and you will carry both for the rest of your life. She held Rhaelle's gaze. That is not a punishment. It is simply what happened. Rhaelle looked at her. Was the belief wrong? I don't know. I don't think anyone will know for a very long time, if ever. She paused, but I don't think believing something that turned out to be costly makes the belief wrong. It makes it costly. Neither of them spoke after that. They sat together in the small cabin while the ship moved against the wind, and it was the most honest silence Rhaelle had shared with another person in years. The second raven found them on the 5th morning. She did not know how Arryn's maester had managed it. Tracking a ship under difficult wind across open water required either exceptional skill or exceptional luck, and she suspected it was both. The bird landed on the rail near the prow, and she untied the message with hands that were steadier than she felt. 6 words. He has sent no riders north. She read it twice. She looked at the sea for a moment. Then she went to find Rhaelle. Rhaelle was at the stern with Daenerys, standing in the early light with the infant against her shoulder, watching the water. She turned when she heard Rhaelle coming. Rhaelle held up the message. Rhaelle read it. She looked up. He knows and hasn't moved. He knows and hasn't moved. That could mean restraint, Rhaelle said, or strategy, or grief, or he's waiting for you. Yes, Rhaelle said, all of those are possible. She took the message back. What it means practically is that the window is still open. He has not decided, or he has decided, and the decision is to wait. She folded the paper. Either way, we need to be there before he stops waiting. Rhaelle shifted Daenerys on her shoulder and looked south toward the coast that was not yet visible. Then stop standing here, she said, and go tell the captain to find a better wind. There was no better wind. They arrived the following morning, exhausted, in a harbor that was still and gray, the city waking slowly around them. Rhaelle was off the ship before it was fully docked. She did not change her clothes at first. She did not send word ahead. She walked from the harbor through the city, still in her traveling dress, salt stiff at the hem, her hair done in the practical way she'd worn it on the ship, and she went directly to his solar and opened the door without waiting to be announced. Robert was at the window. He turned when she came in. He looked at her for a moment, and then looked back out the window, which was its own kind of answer. She sat down. She began. She told him about Dane, the servant's passage, the midnight bell, what Dane had said, and why. She told him about the birth, the hours of it, the boy arriving just before dawn, healthy and loud. She told him what Lyanna had named him, and what Ned had said when Lyanna was sleeping, and what she had said back, and how neither of them had resolved it before the hoofbeats arrived in the yard. She told him what Ned had decided and why, and what she had agreed to and why, and she connected every decision to Lyanna's wishes, to Lyanna's last coherent acts of will, so that Robert could hear the chain of it and understand that nothing had been done to erase his sister, but only to protect what she had asked to be protected. She told him. Who knew? She told him what happened if the wrong person learned it before the right story was in place. Robert did not interrupt once. He stood at the window with his back half turned, and he listened. And he did not react, which was the most frightening thing she had seen him do since Lyanna died. It meant he was not processing. He was deciding. She finished. The room was quiet. He turned from the window. Did she choose him? She knew exactly what he meant, not whether Rhaegar had taken her. That question, she understood. He had already answered for himself in some private way, or he would not have survived the past months with any coherence at all. He meant something harder, whether Lyanna had stayed, whether she would have come back if he had come for her sooner. Before the war was the only way to reach her. Rhaelle thought about Lyanna's face, a woman who chose. The way she had said it, not performing it, not rehearsed, the words of someone stating a fact they had been living with long enough to be certain of. She thought about what she could not know for certain. She thought about the only honest answer she had the right to give. I think she made the best decision she could with what she knew. She said, I think she would have loved you differently had things been different. She held his gaze. And I think she wanted you to know that, which is why she made me promise to be in the room when she told you. She could have sent me away. She didn't. Robert was silent for a long time. Then he walked to the chair across from her and sat in it, heavily, the way he sat in chairs after battles. Not relaxing, but setting down a weight. No riders to Winterfell, he said, quietly, like a man putting down something heavy that he had been holding for 8 days without knowing where to set it. Thank you. He looked at her. Something in his face that she recognized from Storm's End, from decades ago, from a boy who used to find her in the evenings when the yard was empty and ask questions he couldn't ask anyone else. You've been doing this my whole life, he said, holding us back from the worst of ourselves. I've been trying, she said. The results have been mixed. He almost smiled. Not quite. Mixed, he repeated, as though the word were insufficient, but also the only accurate one. It was the closest thing to peace either of them would find for a long time. She could feel it, the specific quality of a moment when two people have said the difficult thing and the room has absorbed it, and there is briefly space to breathe. Then a knock at the door. There was always a knock at the door. The guard entered with a letter on a tray, Jon Arryn's seal, the urgency indent pressed hard into the wax. Robert picked it up. He read it. His face went back to what it had been before the last 5 minutes, not closed, but returned to the work of being a king, which was different from the work of being Robert. He held it out to her. Lord Edwell Celtigar had sent a letter to Pentos, naming Viserys as the true king of the 7 kingdoms. Rhaelle read it twice. She set it on the table between them. Outside the solar window, King's Landing continued becoming whatever it was becoming, indifferent to the specific gravity of this particular room. Jon Arryn had the full letter by the following week. He brought it to Rhaelle first, which told her something about how the small council was already organizing itself around the question of what she was. She read it at the table in her chambers, while Arryn stood by the window with the patience of a man who has already formed a view and is waiting to see if it matches hers. The letter was carefully written. No explicit call for armies. No named allies in Pentos. No figures. No timelines. Just architecture, the careful laying of foundation stones that could, at some future date when Robert was weakened or distracted or dead, support the weight of something much larger. It cited Viserys by name and by right. It referenced, in language that was precise enough to be deliberate, the last Targaryen matriarch, currently serving as counselor to the Baratheon king, and it described her role as a private accommodation between houses rather than an act of loyalty to the realm. Rhaelle set the letter down. "He's painting you as their agent inside the court," Aaron said, "which is unfair. And not entirely false," she said, "which is why it's dangerous." Aaron looked at her. "What do you want to do about it?" She did not answer immediately, because the answer required thinking through carefully, which meant thinking through what Celtigar understood about her position and what he was actually trying to accomplish, and whether the goal was to neutralize her or to use her as a lever against Robert. She thought it was the second. A lever was more useful than a neutralized old woman, and Celtigar had demonstrated in the assembly and in this letter that he thought in terms of leverage. "Nothing yet," she said. "Let me see what he does next." She went to Robert that afternoon and explained the letter's architecture. Without recommending a response, she watched his face as she spoke, not for anger, which she expected, but for the thing that came after anger, which was calculation. He moved through anger quickly. The calculation that followed was what mattered. He was watching her face too, she realized. Reading the calculation in it? "You're not asking me to act," he said. "Not yet. Because you think he'll escalate. I think he has already decided to escalate. The letter to Pentos is the opening, not the statement." She held his gaze. "When he does, I want to see what form it takes. That tells me what he believes he has." Robert leaned back. He was not angry. He was waiting. The particular stillness of a man who has learned, over the past months, that waiting was sometimes the correct move when his grandmother told him it was. It was a more frightening quality in him than his anger, because it meant his judgment was developing in a direction she had not entirely anticipated. "All right," he said, "but if he moves against the settlement, I'll tell you before you find out from someone else." He nodded. The conversation ended. Celtigar moved 3 weeks later. The document arrived in King's Landing on the morning of Robert's first formal court, which was either coincidence or exceptional timing, and she did not believe in coincidence where Celtigar was concerned. It was a single-page Celtigar seal, claiming to be a secret protocol negotiated between Rhaelle Targaryen and Queen Rhaelle, guaranteeing a Targaryen restoration in the next generation. She saw it when it was handed to Robert in the throne room, in front of the full court. She had perhaps 5 seconds before he looked at her. She used them. She thought about the ink, Citadel-grade supply, the specific formulation that the Red Keep's maester used, the last time she had been anywhere near that supply. She ran the dates. She was certain. Robert looked at her across the throne room. She did not flinch. She held his gaze and gave him the smallest possible nod. "I know what this is." And then she spoke, clearly enough for the room to hear. "I'd like a maester to examine that document," she said. "Here, if you're willing. Now." The court went very still. The maester came. He examined the ink, the parchment, the seal's impression. He was thorough. and he was careful, and he was aware that everyone in the room was watching him, which made him more careful still. When he looked up, his expression was the specific expression of a man who has found something definitive and is deciding whether to be relieved or frightened. "The ink," he said. "It's approximately 6 months old. This document would have required access to Citadel-grade supply in King's Landing during a period when—" He glanced at Rhaelle. "Was not in King's Landing." The court exhaled. Robert set the document on the arm of the throne, and then Celtigar, who had been standing near the back of the room, who had presumably understood that the forgery might be exposed, and had prepared for this, said in a voice that carried, "It doesn't matter." The room went still again. "The document is false," he said. "The truth it represents is real. She has been protecting Targaryen lives since she arrived in this city. She negotiated their survival. She made promises to the dead queen on Dragonstone and brought those children back alive. All of that is true, whether the paper is real or not." He looked at Robert. "My lord, I am telling you that your grandmother has spent this entire war serving 2 houses, and one of them is not yours." He was arrested. 2 guards, Robert's word, no discussion. But the room did not exhale again. It held what Celtigar had said in the particular way that rooms hold things that cannot be unsaid, not loudly, not with visible reaction, but in the quality of the silence, in the direction of people's eyes. Rhaelle stood in the throne room and felt the architecture of the past months developing exactly the kind of crack she had feared. Not in the structure, not yet, but in what people chose to believe about the structure. Celtigar was in chains. His words were still in the air. She wrote it in one night and sent it in the morning before she could revise it into something safer. The letter went to 31 lords under her own seal. Dragon quartered with Stag, the same banner she had ridden under on the Rose Road. It contained no apologies and no explanations dressed as apologies. It acknowledged every decision she had made since Storm's End: the cipher, the wildfire, the birth, the settlement, Dragonstone, the children. It stated plainly why she had made each one. It did not ask for understanding. It asked, implicitly, for the lords of the realm to decide for themselves what kind of peace they were willing to inhabit. She told Robert the night before she sent it. He said, "If this goes wrong, I cannot protect you," she said. "I know. I'm not asking you to." He gave permission. She sent it. The replies took 2 weeks to arrive, and they arrived in an order that surprised her. 18 lords responded. She had expected 12, perhaps 14, the ones whose positions were already legible, the ones with enough security in their holdings to absorb the political cost of a complicated public opinion. Instead, 18, men she had calculated as unlikely, wrote back with a specific tone of people who had been given permission to feel something they had been suppressing. The complicated thing, the thing that was neither victory nor guilt, but lived somewhere in between, the feeling of having won a war and not being entirely certain the winning was clean. 13 supported her. Not warmly. 3 of them added qualifications that were almost retractions. 2 hedged so thoroughly she had to read their letters twice to determine which side they were on. 13 names, 13 seals, 13 lords, publicly associated with her account of events rather than Celtigar's. 3 opposed her, and their letters were nearly identical in phrasing. The same constructions, the same sequence of objections, the same loaded language. She set those 3 letters side by side on the table and looked at them for a moment. "Coordinated," she said, "to no one. The remaining 2 lords wrote only to her, privately, with no copies and no witnesses. Their public responses, they said, would be condemnation. Their private response was 2 words apiece, and both pairs of words meant the same thing: keep going. She filed those letters separately and burned neither of them. Then Celtigar produced the forgery. She learned of it the way she learned of most things now, from Aaron before Robert, which remained the most reliable indicator of how the small council understood her position. He brought it to her chambers the night before the court session, which meant she had until morning to think. The document was skilled. She read it carefully, looking for the seam, and found it in the ink. Citadel-grade supply, the specific formulation the Red Keep's maester kept under lock. The last time she had been in proximity to it, she ran the date. She was certain. She also understood, reading it, exactly what Celtigar was attempting. The forgery was not primarily a legal document. It was a frame, a way of making everything she had actually done legible as something more sinister than what it was. Even if the forgery was exposed, the frame would linger. The question, what if she did, was almost impossible to unask once it had been asked. She sat with that for the rest of the night. In the throne room the following morning, when Robert's eyes found hers over the top of the document, she gave him the smallest nod she had. "I know what this is," and asked for a maester. The court went still in the way courts go, still, when they understand they are watching something that will be repeated later in other rooms by people who were not present. The maester examined the ink. He was thorough because the room was watching, and being thorough was the only thing that would mean anything in the retelling. When he looked up and said what he had found, the court exhaled. And then Celtigar said, "It doesn't matter." She heard it. Everyone heard it. He said the quiet part with the deliberate volume of a man who understood he was being arrested regardless and had decided his last free act in that room would be to say the thing clearly. He was wrong about some of it. He was not wrong about all of it. The court knew enough to know the difference, which was worse than if they had known nothing. She stood in the throne room after the guards took him, and she felt, for the first time since the Rose Road, something genuinely uncertain in the structure she had built. Not a collapse, a question, the specific and durable kind, the kind that lives in the space between what is true and what people believe, and refuses to be answered by evidence alone. Celtigar was in chains. His words were in the air. Both things would remain true for a long time. The singer was performing in the Street of Steel by the 3rd week. She heard about it from a kitchen servant before she heard about it from anyone on the small council, which told her the song had already moved past the stage where it could be managed by ignoring it. It was called The Silver Grandmother. She had one of her household knights bring her the words. It was not entirely unfair, which was what made it dangerous. A ballad that was simply wrong could be corrected. A ballad that selected its facts carefully and arranged them in a particular light was something else. The singer had chosen accurately. The cipher, the flag, the wildfire, the children brought back from Dragonstone, and had arranged those accurate things into the story of a woman who had never stopped being a Targaryen, who had entered the rebellion on one side and maneuvered both sides toward her dynasty's survival. Ungenerous, partially true, enormously singable. She set the words down and did not send for the singer. Robert heard it in a tavern and laughed. John Arryn told her so at the morning council, with the tone of a man reporting information he does not know how to weigh. She did not know how to weigh it either. Robert laughing meant he was not threatened. It might also mean he was performing not threatened for rooms full of people who were watching him for signs of threatened. Cersei Lannister arrived in King's Landing that same week, ahead of the formal betrothal ceremony, with her household and her composure and the specific self-possession of a 17-year-old who had been raised to understand that rooms were things to be read and managed. She came to Rhaelle's chambers 3 days after her arrival. She brought wine, good wine, Lannisport vintage, better than what Rhaelle had been drinking. And she sat across the table with the social ease of someone conducting reconnaissance so gracefully it was nearly indistinguishable from courtesy. They talked about the city. They talked about the court's composition. Who had been appointed to what? Which appointments surprised her. Cersei asked careful questions and listened to the answers with attention that was not quite relaxed, the attention of someone cataloging rather than simply listening. Rhaelle let her catalog. She offered nothing she was not prepared to have filed away. At the door, leaving, Cersei paused. She turned back with the slightly too casual timing of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to say the thing they came to say. "You preserved the Targaryens," she said. "My father helped make that possible, the safe passage, holding his army while you traveled." She met Rhaelle's eyes. "I hope, when the time comes, you'll remember that the Lannisters keep their accounts." Rhaelle looked at her for a moment. "I keep mine as well," she said. Cersei smiled, the smile of someone who has received a satisfactory answer to a question they already knew the answer to, and left. Rhaelle sat with her wine for a while after the door closed. She understood the visit completely. She was not comforted by the understanding. Jon Arryn came late that night, after the second bell, with the face she had learned to read, the face of a man who has been present while something was decided, and has come to tell her about it before she hears it another way. Robert's small counsel, at Tywin's suggestion, she understood immediately, and almost certainly arrived through Cersei's ear, had drafted a proposal, an official title, a stipend, a set of responsibilities listed with specificity, designed to honor her in public and define the boundaries of her role in writing. King's Counselor for the Realm's Reconciliation. She said the title aloud once. Arryn had the grace not to react. "When does Robert present it?" she asked. "Tomorrow," he said. He wanted it to be informal. She nodded. Arryn left. The candle burned. She did not spend the night deciding whether to accept. That was not the interesting question. The title was honorable, and the stipend was real, and the defined responsibilities were a cage dressed as a gift, and accepting the cage was the only available move. Refusing it would be read as proof of Celtigar's accusation, the reaction of someone who didn't want to be contained because they had things to hide. She would accept. The question was what she could extract from the act of accepting. She thought about that until the candle went out, and then she lit another one and thought about it some more. By dawn, she had 3 additions. Robert presented it over breakfast as Arryn had said he would, in the small dining room off his solar, with no counsel present and no witnesses except the servant, who poured the wine and withdrew. He slid the document across the table with a slightly apologetic air of a man delivering something he did not entirely author. She read it. She already knew what it said. She read it anyway, carefully, because reading a document carefully in front of the person who gave it to you was its own kind of statement. The title was King's Counselor for the Realm's Reconciliation. The stipend was generous. The responsibilities were specific and bounded and written to honor her publicly, while defining in precise language the edges of what she was permitted to do. It was elegant work. She recognized Tywin's thinking in the structure, the way the boundaries were framed as extensions of authority rather than limitations of it, so that the cage would read, in any official record, as an elevation. She set it down. "I'll accept," she said. Robert looked mildly surprised, which meant he had expected an argument and had prepared for one. Just like that, not just like that. She reached into her sleeve and produced a single folded page. She set it on top of his document. "I have 3 additions." He picked it up. He read it. His face went through something careful, not resistance, but the particular attention of a man reading words that are changing the shape of something he thought he understood. The first addition: formal authority over the placement and welfare of all Targaryen exiles, written into crown law, non-revocable without a full small council vote. The second, a direct communication channel to the children of every great house, an educational correspondence, she called it, designed to ensure the next generation understood the peace that had been made and the cost at which it had been purchased. The third, written confirmation that any person under her household protection was covered by crown law with the same legal standing as any other crown ward. He looked up. "You're building something. I have been since the day you raised your banners," she said. "I'm asking you to make it official." He set the page down and looked at it for a moment. "The exile authority. I want the language reviewed. I expected you to. The correspondence with the great houses, that needs parameters. Name them, and I'll work within them. And the household protection clause." He stopped. He looked at her. They both understood what the household protection clause was actually for. Neither of them named it. "Within crown law," she said, "exactly as written." They went back and forth for 40 minutes. He pushed on the language of the exile authority twice, and she conceded the first time on a point that didn't matter, and held the second time on a point that did. And he knew the difference, but accepted it anyway, which told her something about how he understood the negotiation. He was not trying to minimize what she was building. He was trying to ensure he understood its shape before he signed it. She watched his face as he wrote his name at the bottom of the amended document. What she saw was a man who trusted her more than he trusted the piece itself, who was betting on the architect rather than the architecture, because he had spent enough time watching her work to believe the architect was the more reliable variable. It was the most flattering thing she had encountered in 71 years. It was also the most dangerous. If she failed, if she died, if she miscalculated in some future situation she could not yet see, the structure would not hold without her. She was the load-bearing wall of a building she had designed as she went, without a blueprint, and she had just agreed to remain in that position for as long as she was able. She took the document when he slid it back to her. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just don't make me regret it. You've said that to me before." It keeps being relevant. The Raven from Winterfell arrived that afternoon, addressed in Ned Stark's hand directly to her, not to Robert, not to the council, just to her, which was itself a message about how Ned understood the arrangement. The letter was brief. Jon was healthy. The household was settled. He asked, without quite asking, whether the situation in the south was stable. She wrote back in plain language. The cipher was unnecessary now. The secret it had been built to carry was in the only hands that needed to hold it, or as close to that as she could manage. It is stable. The king knows the general shape of things, not the specific truth. Keep the boy well and raise him honestly, and tell him when the time comes that his grandmother on his mother's side kept her promise. She sealed it. She gave it to her maester. The room was quiet. Late afternoon light came through the window. At the low angle it took in autumn, the kind of light that made everything look briefly like it was being preserved rather than simply lit. She had not sat still, not genuinely still, in over a year. She sat with it, all of it, the cipher sewn in thread, the wildfire smell on the road through the city, Lyanna's face when she held the boy for the first time, Robert in the yard of Storm's End 2 years ago, saying go, the settlement document signed by torchlight, Rhaelle's one sentence from Dragonstone, Celtigar's words still in the air of the throne room. She did not know whether what she felt was pride or grief or simply the exhaustion of a woman who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time without setting it down. Perhaps all three, perhaps they were the same thing at this distance. She sat with it until the light changed. Edwin Celtigar had been 19 years old when he watched his father led away in chains. He had stood in the back of the throne room, too young to be seated with the lords, old enough to be present, and he had watched. And he had not made a sound, not because he was afraid, and not because he was indifferent, because he was already thinking. She had noticed him then, in the way she noticed people who were thinking when everyone around them was reacting. She had not considered him a threat. He was 19, and his father was in chains, and the throne room was full of men with more resources and more immediate grievances. That had been a year ago. She had learned over 72 years that a year was sufficient time for a patient person to become a dangerous one. The transfer had been her plan, which meant its failure was her failure. Viserys had been living in her King's Landing residence for 3 months. A transitional arrangement while the Essos household was finalized, the servants vetted, the route settled. She had designed the handoff to Driftmark herself. A small escort, a covered litter, the timing set for the gray morning hours. When the streets were quiet, she had not used her full network because Viserys was 7 and the route was 20 minutes, and she had done it in daylight. She had not accounted for 14 months of study. Edwin Celtigar had spent 14 months learning her household's patterns, which gate, which bells, which servants carried which information. He knew the transfer was coming before she had finalized the timing, which meant he had a source inside her household which she had not believed was possible, which was itself the most useful piece of information the disaster had produced. She would find the source later. A pleasant young man who smelled of the sea had intercepted the litter 2 streets from the harbor. He told the boy there was a ship with a dragon on the prow and asked if he wanted to see it. Viserys was 7. He went. She learned of it at dawn. When her escort returned without the litter and with the faces of men who understood they had failed at the one thing they had been given to do. She stood in her chambers for a moment. Then she went to work. The plan, when she found it, was nothing. Viserys was on a ship heading for the free cities. Ravens to Pentos and Bravos, and Meyer would arrive after he did. She could mobilize a fleet, Robert's fleet, but a Baratheon fleet pursuing a 7-year-old boy across the narrow sea was the kind of action that turned a managed situation into a war, and the fleet would not catch the ship regardless. She could tell Robert, or she could not tell Robert, She told Robert. She went to him within the hour, because delay would be worse. Delay would be a choice, and he would know she had made it, and that knowledge would cost more than the news itself. She told him plainly what had happened, how, and what she believed it meant. She watched his face run through several things in the space of a long breath, and arrive finally at something cold and final. He was quiet for a moment. A fleet, he said. Eventually, when the boy is somewhere findable. He said it without inflection. Not a threat. A calculation. I won't consult you on that. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. On the walk from her chambers to his, Solar counting the ways. This changed the peace. The number was not small. A Targaryen boy in the free cities was a Targaryen boy with access to Associ wealth and Essoci armies and the specific magnetism of a lost cause that could find funding precisely because it was lost. Robert looked at her. The cold thing was still in his face. You built something beautiful, grandmother, he said. You built it beautifully. He paused. And it has a hole in it. She said nothing. What do I do with a piece that has a hole in it? She told him the truest thing she knew. You live in it. You tend the parts that hold. A piece with a hole in it is still a piece. Robert looked at her for a long time. Or it's a war that hasn't started yet, he said. He walked out. She sat in his solar after he left. He had not asked her to leave, and she had not moved, and the servants understood enough to stay out of the room. The document she had signed with him 2 months ago was in her chambers. The 3 editions she had extracted. The formal authority over Targaryen exiles, which now had a limit she had not designed into it. The household protection clause, which had not protected the household. She had built something. She had built it carefully and over a long time, and with every tool available to her, and it had a hole in it, because she had underestimated a 19-year-old boy standing silent in the back of a throne room, already thinking. She did not know whether Robert was right. A war that hadn't started yet was also a peace that was still holding. Both descriptions were accurate. The question was which one governed, and that question, she understood, was not hers to answer alone anymore. Perhaps it never had been. 2 years after the war, Rhaelle Targaryen sits at her desk in the Red Keep, a candle low, a letter in front of her she has been writing for 3 months and cannot finish. The name on the outside, Jon Snow, at Winterfell. Below it, to be given to him when he is old enough. She has crossed out the final paragraph 4 times. The letter begins with a name, his true name, and explains what it means. It tells him about Rhaegar, not the silver ghost of Robert's grievances, but the man who believed something unprovable, rode south to test it, and was killed before the answer came back. It tells him about Lyanna, that she chose, that she was not taken, but went, that she saw the cost and paid it clear-eyed. It tells him about Ned Stark and what it costs a man to carry a dead woman's secret from her bedside to a child's cradle and hold it there for years. Rhaelle writes it all because she was present for most of it, and history written by survivors is the only kind there is. Robert arrives without announcement, cup in hand, not drinking. He stands in the doorway the way men do when they have come somewhere without quite deciding to come. You're always awake, he says. So are you. He sits by the window. After a moment, do you think it was worth it? The rebellion. all of it. She thinks about Lyanna's face in the tower, already going. Eris on the floor, the crown rolling free. The wildfire beneath the city, emptied before it could be used. A boy at Winterfell who does not yet know his name. Some of it, she says. The parts that survived. Robert holds that. He nods. Not agreement, but recognition of an answer that isn't performing anything. He leaves without a good night. She returns to the letter. Every time she tried to leave him something useful, she recognized what it was. An old woman arranging a life she would not be present for. She writes about the night he was born instead. The candlelight at the tower. The city quiets after the sack. Lyanna holding him, not gently, not like something fragile, but with the fierceness of a woman leaving behind something that matters. She writes, "Your mother was not a tragedy. She loved it completely and paid everything for it. Whether it was worth the cost, that is yours to decide, not mine." She seals it. Give it to her maester with instructions that will outlast her. Then goes to the window. King's Landing below, the city that did not burn, the dynasty that did not entirely fall, the war that ended in a room instead of a river. What she feels is not triumph, not peace exactly, the specific, unglamorous satisfaction of a woman who saw what needed doing and did it imperfectly on her own terms. The stars are the same stars that burned above Summerhall when her father died. She was a girl then. She kept surviving. She kept working. She is still here. She is still tending. The letter will find him when it finds him. What he does with it is not hers to know.